is suffering an increasing number of devastating attacks behind its own lines in its war with the Ukraine. Mysterious drone attacks on Moscow, on the Kremlin itself, oil and fuel depots and bridges blown up, air bases attacked, assassinations. No one has publicly claimed responsibility for these attacks. However, BizNews has been given a glimpse into the war zone. We spoke to Andrei Kebkalo, the founder and CEO of Omega Consulting Group. He answered some of our questions from his HQ in the northern Ukraine, near the border of Belarus. Welcome, Andrei.
Hi, Chris. Thank you very much for having me here.
Andrei, how many operators have you trained since the start of the war?
Since 2022, we trained approximately 2,000 people, men and women.
What makes these operators so extraordinary?
We trained very different kinds of people. Some of them are professional military, even foreigners, but majority of our trainees are just ordinary civilians. We have accountants, cooks, bakers, school teachers, engineers, you name it. I remember we even had a guy, he was a professor. So he taught classes in a university directly from the trench between the combats. Well, that's pretty amazing because this guy, he never had military experience before. And let's say 30 minutes ago, he could have died in a fight, but he still has a responsibility. So basically what he was doing, he was taking a computer, he plugged this computer into Starlink antenna, and he was still teaching his students. That's a big responsibility for him. And despite the fact that all these guys are civilians with absolutely no military experience, they decided voluntarily to learn how to ambush military convoys, how to assault sites, set the explosive devices. And I think that the level of their courage, determination, and by example of this professor, self-discipline and responsibility, all this makes these people extraordinary. Nothing gonna be in Ukraine like before. Ukraine has been changed since February 22. It's like black and white. People are very different now.
What specialist skills have these operators been instructed in?
We mainly train small units, specialists. Specialists in explosives, snipers, anti-tank operators, UAV operators, medics, radiomans, topographers, combat controllers, etc. So as you can see, if we put together all these specialists, then we can easily formate solid, self-sustained, hit-and-run teams. Now, as I said before, we trained approximately 2,000 people. And if we take a minimum amount of packs in a one team, four people in a team. So we have 500 small teams. Imagine what damage they can cause to enemy forces. And this is only Omega. Only Omega prepared 500 teams. I'm not talking about other entities and military units. So that's great value added to conventional forces.
What damage has been inflicted on Russia in these attacks?
That's a very interesting question, actually. And I have to say that sometimes in sabotage operations, the main goal is more symbolic than a military. If we're talking, for example, about Kerch Bridge, in my opinion only, obviously, There was a clear message between the lines, basically saying, guys, there are no more safe places for you. At the same time, I know that a lot of Russians live in Crimea. And again, the message was saying, if you want to leave Crimea, you have to do it now. Because when Ukrainian army will launch counteroffensive, that's going to be too late for you. Again, bridges are quite often seen as some sort of symbol of friendship, unity, connection. And actually, this bridge was connecting Ukrainian Crimea and Russia. And when this bridge was in flame, it was a clear picture of the fact that there is nothing in common between Russia and Ukraine. If we're talking about attacks on Russian soil, on military air bases and fuel depots, from military point of view, yes, they are important, effective, because, for example, after attack on Engels air base, Russians, they had to relocate their strategic bombarders deeper inside Russia. But at the same time, we showed to Russians and we showed to international community the ineffectiveness of Russian famous air defense, the lack of security. Why lack of security? Because I remember footage on the internet where the guy during the day walked into the airbase and planted IEDs in the engine bay of very expensive Russian combat helicopters, and he actually managed to damage some of these helicopters. I mean, how is that possible? That again, I would like to emphasize, during the day, someone just walks into airbase. To me, it's kind of strategic location, important strategic location, and he's basically doing his business and walks back because no one was captured actually after that. So, from military point of view, all these operations are important and again successful, but I think the main damage was done to the image of Russian military.
How did the Kremlin react to the double drone attack on the Senate Palace?
Well, if we take into account the level of tension between Russian decision makers and influential people, for example, like Minister of Defense and the owner of Russian private military company Wagner Group, it does look very much like another failed operation of Russian branches. I recognize a Patrushev style here. If that's the case, then I think the aim of this operation was twofold. Firstly, to raise the degree of popular indignation, so to speak. We're fighting a holy war, and the government cannot protect even its own Senate palace. And secondly, to spark a rift between Ukraine and its allies. Well, yeah, that's a good try, but definitely it's not going to change anything in the relationship between Ukraine and the Western partners.
Apart from the military consequences, how important is sabotage in your military strategy?
I won't say these operations were crucial. They were important, of course, but these sabotage operations were some sort of early warnings to Russians, but obviously Russians didn't get these warnings right. Basically, the meaning was, guys, we're already here, and you have to wait for more to come. What's happening now, we have military operations, military raids in Russia, on Russian territory. We have tanks, we have foreign vehicles, foreign APCs, we have foreign weapons, we have combat encounters, etc. This is not sabotage anymore. It's war in Russia, on Russian soil. And this is quite right. We have to bring this war back to Russia. You know, this approach is written in many Western military doctrines. Quite simple. I'll just give you an example. For instance, if we destroy a Russian tank in Russia, it's good. Why? Because if we don't, sooner or later, this tank will appear in Ukraine, and this tank will kill Ukrainian soldiers and possibly Ukrainian civilians. So if we call generally all these, tanks, APCs, rocket launchers, aviation, soldiers, Russian soldiers, if we call these assets, so simply more assets we destroy in Russia, less assets will appear later in Ukraine. And I think this is something that must be done. And that's right, that's correct.
Do you believe that wars are often won by forces that operate in the shadows?
I wouldn't say that. And definitely this is not our case. We're dealing now with a full-scale war, and shadow forces are good to have. It's nice. And definitely they're a great value added. But in order to win this war in Ukraine, we have to rely on all available tools, from small sabotage units to conventional forces, media space, and, of course, international diplomatic efforts.
Have the soldiers trained by you been involved in conventional and later guerrilla warfare since the start of the full-scale invasion by Russia?
Omega Consulting Group is a private entity, and we don't have soldiers, we have operators. But I get your question. Yes, Omega was involved from the first day, mainly up north, initially in conventional military operation, and later on in point operations, intelligence gathering, and training. Unfortunately, at this stage, I can't disclose any details.
Are there guerrilla commandos operating right now in Russia and Belarus?
All possible, and not only in these two countries.
How do you see this war ending, Andrei?
Well, I can see three different scenarios here. One of them is definitely more practical, and another two are more theoretical, I think. Obviously, the most optimistic scenario for Ukraine and its allies is the military victory in the war and Russian recognition of defeat. This must include the liberation of all Ukrainian internationally recognized territories, punishment of all Russian war criminals, including Putin himself, demilitarization of Russia and denuclearization of Russia as well, and fast integration, Ukrainian integration into NATO and European Union, as well as we need some sort of military and security guarantees before full NATO integration, if that will be possible, of course. But essential element for the realization of this scenario is a change of Russian regime before the negotiation about our future coexistence will start. But to be honest, I don't see at the moment, obviously, I don't see a clear-cut defeat of either side in this war. So this option is, at the moment, remains theoretical. Now, the second option, which is more practical, is, for example, if despite Ukraine having liberated all its territories, Putin remains in power. Well, in that case, we will need, I think, and again, it's only my personal opinion, we will need some sort of a buffer zone without any military at all. I don't know how many kilometers, 200, 300 kilometers, but with this buffer zone will help us to identify any movements from Russian side. Because even if that will happen, I mean, even if we will manage to liberate all our territories and take the Donbass and Crimea back, it's not going to be the end of war. The Russia will represent a threat to Ukraine all the time. Look what happened. This is not our first war. The first war started in 2014. And look, in 2022, they came back. And exactly the same now. If we will win this war and take all our territories back, but Putin will remain in power with his entourage, it's just a question of time. They will come back. They will reassess. They will regroup. Maybe there will be a military reform or something, but they will come back in 1 year, in 2 years, or in 10 years. It's just imminent. The threat from Russia is imminent. So two things we will need. We will need this buffer zone without any military. So a first Russian tank appears in this buffer zone. For us, it will be a red flag that Russians are up to something. And we need a very strong military. We need extremely strong military, so Russians in the future won't even think about reattacking us again. So in this scenario, again, to summarize, we need 200, 300 kilometers non-militarized buffer zone, and we have to invest heavily in Ukrainian armed forces. So Russians will have no desire at all to attack us again. And the last scenario, obviously, is if there is a problem with liberation of all Ukrainian territories, I think that growing number of international players could possibly insist on temporary ceasefire. But that will lead us to a very prolonged war in the future. It's not going to be the end. It's going to be a Palestine model in Ukraine, I think. But again, this is only my personal opinion.
What has been the impact of the very recent drone attacks on Moscow?
We're watching with interest what's going on in Russia and in particular in Moscow. I think that Moscow is the most highly protected city of Russia. And if something is flying there, then the question number one is what air defense is doing. I mean, we've seen all these air defense units installed on the rooftops of the buildings in Moscow, and what they do now. The next question is to local residents. Do you like it? Because as far as I remember, in 2021, nothing was flying in Moscow's sky filled with explosives. So what happened? And I can tell you what happened. Because in 2022, someone decided that you guys need to go to another country and liberate this country from nationalists and apparently Nazis. I don't know. Someone decided, and many people supported this idea. Well, now you have to assume the consequences. He who sow winds reaps the storm.
Do you have a message for Russian President Putin?
I don't have a message for this man. His life is already miserable, and anyway, I don't think he will listen what I'm saying. Why his life is miserable? Well, just a few examples. Because he's constantly on the run. He's not a public person. I've seen that in Iraq. I spent 6 years in Iraq, and I know that Saddam Hussein never slept twice in the same place. For example, he's sleeping today in one palace, tomorrow in another palace, and after tomorrow in a different place. That's exactly the same as Putin. He's not a public individual, constantly hiding, which is quite miserable. back in 2021, 2020, maybe for some people, this guy was kind of respectful and influential leader. Now, nobody wants to shake his hand. Nobody wants to take a picture with him anymore. Nobody wants to even stand next to him, because if you're standing next to Putin, then there is a possibility that you're a close friend of a war criminal, or you just support somehow a war criminal, you know. What's happening to Russia now? Look, despite of what they're saying, what Russians are saying, a fact is a fact. If someone wants to study in a university, they go to UK or they go to United States. Nobody is willing to go to Russia and study in Russian university. If someone wants to chill, they go to Côte d'Azur. They go to France, they go to Spain, Portugal, many different countries, Turkey, wherever. Nobody wants to go and chill in Russia, you know. All big industries, car manufacturers, I don't know, manufacturers of cosmetics, whatever you want, they're leaving Russia because they don't want to be associated with criminals and murderers, you know. Lying. This guy, Putin, is constantly lying. He's lying to international community, and he's lying to its own people. He promised Russians to take Kyiv in 3 days. And what's happened? Russian army is stuck in Ukraine for 15 months. They came here with a parade uniform in their tanks and trucks because they've been 100% positive on a military parade in Kyiv. But he lied. For 15 months, I think, Russian army is in Ukraine, stuck in Ukraine. They deny casualties. We killed more than 200,000 Russian soldiers. But Russian government deny casualties. They said no casualties. Okay, then, if we kill 200,000 Russian soldiers, then obviously somewhere we have 200,000 Russian families waiting for these soldiers to come back, because for them, these are sons, brothers, husbands, cousins, well, any kind of relatives. You know, if we kill 200,000 soldiers, then somewhere in Russia, 200,000 families are waiting for these people to come back. But these people will never come back because all of them are dead in Ukraine by now. So how Russian government will explain this, that 200,000 soldiers just disappeared somewhere because there is no casualties? So that's a big lie. And what's amazing is that people, they still trust this guy for some reason. Military industry, you know, on the top of the list before 2022. And now Putin and Russian government are begging Iran, begging China, other countries for anything, for any weapons or ammunition. So that was a big lie about Russian military industry. The mighty Russian army, number 2 in the world, turned out in 2022 being an army of inmates, murderers, and rapists, because they came here not as a professional military, as a professional soldiers. They came here directly out of prison to kill civilians, to rape men and women and children, and to steal. They steal everything. They steal microwaves. They steal TVs. They steal furniture, cars, jewelry, iPhones, everything. I remember on the wall of the house that Russian soldiers left, they left behind a drawing on the wall. As far as I remember, they said, who authorized you to live good? So that's the Russian army. It's not a professional military. It's a professional jealousy. Technically speaking, why we live in a shit and you live good? That's the problem for them, And the list is long. I mean, I can, keep going for hours and hours. The real message here for Russian people is you have to think about your future. Don't think about what's going on in Ukraine. You have to think about your future. You will be an isolated country, And the only option is to get out of this circle is to change your government, truly. So my advice, think about this.
Thank you. That was Andrei Kebkalo speaking to BizNews from the northern Ukraine near the Belarus border.
Thank you very much, Chris, for this invitation. I think I expressed only my opinion, and this opinion is personal and maybe different from the opinion of Ukrainian government. Thank you very much, Chris, again, and thank you very much, the audience.